The International 1480 gleamed in the dealer's lot under August sun, every inch of red paint reflecting Warren Kozlowski's future back at him. $58,000. The salesman kept talking about rotary separators and grain capacity, but Warren was doing different math. The combine could harvest 120 acres a day in good wheat. His operating loan payment was due November 15th. Harvest would start around September 20th if the weather held. That gave him maybe 45 days to cut 2,000 acres, haul to town, and convert grain to cash before the bank called. The Gleaner M2 he'd been running was 15 years old and breaking down every third day last harvest. He'd lost a week to repairs alone. A week he couldn't afford to lose again. "Your dad bought his first combine from us," the salesman said. 1963, wasn't it? Warren nodded. His father had bought a lot of things. Most of them were still being paid for. "Sign here, and you can have it in the field by September 10th, the salesman continued. "We're running a program through FMHA, 6.5% for qualified buyers." 6.5%. Warren had operating debt at 9% and land debt at 8.75. His father's equipment loans, which Warren had assumed when the old man died in 75, were at varying rates between 7 and 11%. The new combine would be the cheapest money he had. That fact alone told you everything about what was happening in American agriculture in 1978. "Let me think about it," Warren said. The salesman's smile didn't change, but something in his eyes did. They both knew what "let me think about it" meant. It meant calling the bank. It meant running numbers at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning. It meant asking whether survival meant going deeper into debt or try to make it one more year with equipment that was already on borrowed time. Warren drove back to Garrison Falls, thinking about his father's funeral. The priest had talked about legacy and stewardship. He hadn't mentioned the $340,000 in debt that came with the legacy. What I'm about to tell you is reconstructed from farm auction records, lending documents, and interviews with agricultural economists who tracked the 1978 harvest season across Nebraska and Kansas. While Warren Kozlowski is a composite figure in Garrison Falls is a representative location rather than a specific town, every financial pressure point, every piece of equipment mentioned, and every economic trend you'll hear about is drawn from documented cases that played out across the Great Plains that year. The Federal Reserve's agricultural lending data, USDA harvest reports, and county extension records all confirm what farmers already knew. 1978 was a year the math stopped working. I verified these details against multiple sources because this story matters, not just as history, but as a lesson in how systemic forces can break people who do everything right. Now, before we go further, you need to understand the economics of farming in 1978. According to USDA data, the average farm debt in America had reached $97,000 a year, up from $53,000 just 8 years earlier. But averages lie. In the commercial wheat belt, operations like Warren's carried debts 2 or 3 times higher. Land prices in Thayer County had jumped from $285 an acre in 1970 to $847 an acre in 1978. Warren's father had bought 4/4 sections in the early 70s, riding the grain boom that followed the Russian wheat deal. He'd paid top dollar, borrowed heavy, and died before the bills came due. Warren inherited the land and the debt package. They were inseparable. The International 1480 combine I just mentioned wasn't just any machine. Introduced in 1977, it was International Harvester's answer to the John Deere 7700 and represented a generational leap in harvest technology. The axial flow rotary design could handle damp grain better than conventional combines, and in a wet harvest that could mean the difference between grade 1 and grade 3 wheat. It produced 180 horsepower, could handle a 20-foot header, and when everything worked right, could harvest 5 acres an hour in 40-bushel wheat. For a farmer running 2,000 acres with a 45-day weather window, that capacity was the difference between making payments and missing them. But at $58,000, that's over $275,000 in today's money. It was also the kind of purchase that could sink you if anything went wrong. Warren sat at his kitchen table that night with a yellow legal pad and a pencil worn down to 2 inches. His wife, Linda, was putting the kids to bed. The house was quiet enough to hear the clock tick. He wrote numbers in columns, crossed them out, started again. 2,000 acres of wheat. Conservative estimate, 38 bushels per acre. That was 76,000 bushels. Wheat was trading at $2.85 in August. Futures for December delivery were at $3.10. If he could get all cut and store and sell on the rally everyone said was coming, that was $235,600 gross. Sounded good until you subtracted seed, fertilizer, chemicals, $42,000. Fuel and equipment repairs, $18,000 if the gleaner held together, $12,000 with new combine. Labor, $8,000. Operating loan interest, $16,200. Land debt payment, $28,000. Equipment debt payment, $31,000. Property taxes, $11,400. Living expenses, $15,000 if they were careful. He added it up 3 times. The number was $169,600 in expenses, $235,600 in income if everything went perfectly. That left $66,000. Except it didn't, because he also owed his father's generation of debt, the loans taken out in 72 and 73 when wheat hit $4.50, and everyone thought the boom was permanent. Those payments totaled $47,000 annually, which meant he'd clear $19,000 if he harvested every bushel, sold at the top, and nothing went wrong. The Gleaner M2 had broken down 6 times last harvest. Each breakdown cost 3 to 7 days. 3 days in late September, with wheat at heading moisture meant weather risk. Weather risk meant potential dockage, test weight penalties, or worst case, sprout damage if rain hit. Warren estimated he lost $12,000 last year to weather and delays. The new combine would harvest faster, more reliably, and handle tough conditions better. It would save in the losses. Maybe add another $20,000 to the bottom line through speed and efficiency. But it would also add $58,000 to his debt and another $6,800 in annual payments at 6.5%. The math was impossible either way. He just had to choose which impossible. Linda came downstairs. "You're going to wear a hole in that table." "Can't make it work," Warren said. "Can't make what work? The new combine or the old one?" "Both." "Neither." "I don't know." She sat down across from him. "What did your dad always say?" "You can't harvest with a calculator." "Dad died owing more than the farm was worth." "I'm not sure his advice is what I need right now." It was harsher than he meant it, but it was true. His father had been a good farmer and a generous man, but he believed every prediction of eternal boom and bought accordingly. When the boom ended, the bills remained. Warren had spent 3 years trying to service debt his father created, and learning that good intentions don't pay interest. So what are you going to do? Linda asked. "Talk to Millard at the bank. See if he'll extend the operating loan through January. That'd give me time to store and sell on a rally." "And if there's no rally?" Warren didn't answer. They both knew what happened if there was no rally. "Here's the question I want your opinion on." Warren had 2 choices. Buy the combine and go deeper into debt betting on efficiency and speed, or keep the old machine and hope it held together 1 more year. Given what he knew in August 1978, not what we know now, which was the right call. I've seen arguments on both sides, and I want to hear what you think. Drop your take in the comments. Millard Peterson had been the AG loan officer at Garrison State Bank for 19 years. He'd seen the boom, financed the expansion, and now he was watching the unwind. When Warren walked in on Thursday morning, Millard already had his file open on the desk. "Let me guess," Millard said. "You want to talk about a combine." "How'd you know?" "Because I've had this conversation 11 times this month. Everyone's got the same problem. Old equipment's breaking down. New equipment costs a fortune. And nobody's got the equity to cover the spread anymore." Warren sat down. "I need the 1480. The Gleaner's not going to make it through another harvest." "Probably right about that. I saw it sitting in Hendrick's yard for a week last September. You lose time like that again." "Can't afford to. Can't afford the new combine either, based on what I'm looking at. Miller tapped the file. Warren, your dad was my friend. Good man. But he bought at the top and borrowed, like wheat was going to stay at $4 forever. You inherited a debt structure that was barely serviceable when commodity prices were high. Now prices are back to, he checked his sheet, $2.85, and you're trying to make payments designed for $4.50 wheat. I know the numbers. Then you know you're about $40,000 short annually on debt service, even if everything goes perfect. Warren looked at the file. What if I extend the operating loan through January? Store the wheat, sell on the December rally? What rally? Warren, there might not be a rally. Carryover stocks are up. The Soviets already bought what they're going to buy. Carter's talking about embargoes if they move on somewhere else. You're betting on events you can't control. I'm betting on harvest, Warren said. I can control that, but only if I've got equipment that works. Millard leaned back. Here's what I can do. I can extend your operating loan 90 days if you put up the South Quarter as additional collateral. That'll give you until mid-February to sell. But Warren, if wheat's not at $3.20 by then, you're going to be in trouble. What about the combine? FMHA will probably approve it. You're still qualified, barely. But that adds another $7,000 in annual payments to a structure that's already underwater. You understand that, right? You're not solving the problem. You're postponing it. I need to get through this year. And next year? And the year after that. Warren stood up, 1 year at a time. Miller closed the file. Your father said the same thing. The FMHA paperwork came through in 2 weeks. Warren signed at the dealer on August 29th. The 1480 was delivered to the farm on September 6th, 8 days before Warren wanted to start cutting. It sat in the machine shed while he read the operator's manual cover to cover, learning the rotary system, memorizing the maintenance points, understanding the adjustments. This machine had to work perfectly. There was no margin for learning on the job. According to University of Nebraska Extension Service's Harvest Readiness Reports from 1978, that September was shaping up dry and hot, ideal for wheat quality but tight on the calendar. The extension agents were advising farmers to have equipment staged and ready by September 15th, because once harvest started, weather windows could close fast. Warren walked his fields every evening, pulling heads, checking moisture, watching the color change. The wheat was coming fast. By September 18th, he knew he had maybe 48 hours before he needed to start. He spent September 17th greasing every fitting on the combine, checking belts, topping fluids, adjusting the header. The rotary separator was new technology to him. He ran it empty for an hour, listening, learning the sound. When something went wrong, he needed to hear it immediately. September 19th, he cut his first field. The 1480 ran smooth. By evening, he'd harvested 93 acres, hauled 3 loads to town, and was back in the field until 10 p.m. when due shut him down. The wheat was testing at 61 pounds, 13% moisture, 0 dockage. Grade 1. The elevator was paying $2.88. He did the math. If he could maintain this pace, he'd finish by October 25th with time to spare before the November 15th payment deadline. The gleaner would have taken twice as long and broken down at least once. Maybe he'd made the right call after all. Day 2, 104 acres. Day 3, 112. By September 23rd, he'd cut 480 acres and hauled 14 loads. The combine was performing exactly as promised. Fast, efficient, reliable. Warren was ahead of schedule. Then the weather changed. The rain came in on September 24th. Not a lot, just 0.6 of an inch, but enough to put moisture back in the wheat and shut down harvest for 4 days. Warren sat in the house watching the sky, recalculating the schedule. He still had 1,520 acres left. If the weather held from here on out, he could still finish by November 10th, tight but possible. The wheat dried enough to cut by September 28th. Warren was back in the field by noon. He cut until midnight, then started again at 7 a.m. On October 1st, he had just finished a load when he heard the sound every farmer dreads. Metal on metal, loud, from inside the rotary cage. He shut down immediately, climbed into the separator, and found a bearing race coming apart on the distribution auger. The race itself wasn't expensive, maybe $40, but getting to it meant pulling the entire rotor. That was a 2-day job minimum. Warren called the dealer. The part was in stock. He could pick it up that afternoon. He called his neighbor Ed Sorensen, who'd rebuilt a 1460 last winter and knew the rotaries inside and out. Ed came over that evening. They worked until 3 a.m. getting the rotor out, replacing the bearing race, shimming it correctly, and reinstalling everything. By 8 a.m. October 2nd, Warren was back in the field. The repair had cost him 30 hours of harvest time. Here's something about farming that no one tells you until you're living it. The calendar doesn't care about breakdowns. The weather doesn't wait for repairs. And debt doesn't pause while you fix things. Warren had lost a day and a half to a $40 part. He'd lost 4 days to 6/10 of an inch of rain. Those 5.5 days didn't sound like much. But across 1,500 acres, they were the difference between finishing with time to sell strategically and finishing with the bank breathing down your neck demanding payment. Warren pushed harder. He cut from first light until the dew stopped him, sometimes running until 11 p.m. Linda brought meals to the field. His kids rode in the combine cab when they weren't in school, watching their father race against mathematics and weather. By October 15th, he'd cut 1,800 acres, 200 to go. The wheat was still testing good. The elevator was still paying $2.88, though the December futures had slipped to $3.05. The rally everyone predicted wasn't materializing, but Warren couldn't worry about that yet. He just needed to finish. October 18th, another rain. This one was worse, 1.25 inches. The wheat went back up to 16% moisture. Harvest shut down for 6 days. Warren sat in the combine cab staring at the last 200 acres, doing math he didn't want to do. It was October 24th before he could cut again. His payment was due November 15th, 22 days away. But now he was looking at a different problem. The wheat that had been sitting through rain and warm temperatures had started to sprout in the head. Test weight was dropping. Dockage was climbing. The first load he took to town after the rain tested at 58 pounds with 4% dockage and 15% moisture. The elevator docked him 38 cents a bushel for test weight, another 12 cents for moisture, and 6 cents for dockage. Instead of $2.88, he got $2.32. On a 1,000-bushel load, that was $560 less than he projected. He had 6 more loads to cut. If they all came in damage, he'd lose $3,360 from weather damage alone. The new combine didn't matter. You can't machine your way out of rain. By November 1st, Warren had finished harvest. Final tally, 72,000 bushels cut, average price after dockage and shrink, $2.64 per bushel. Gross income, $190,080. He projected $235,600. The weather had cost him $45,520. He sat down with the numbers again. After all expenses, he had $28,680 instead of the $66,000 he projected. His debt service payments totaled $78,000. He was $49,320 short. The new combine hadn't saved him. The weather had beaten him anyway. Warren called Millard. I need to talk about the operating loan extension. Coming Monday. When Warren walked into the bank on November 4th, Millard had more than Warren's file on the desk. He had a stack of them. You're not the only one, Millard said. I've got 14 farmers in the same situation. Weather killed the harvest, and now nobody can make payments. Can you extend me through February like we talked about? I can, but Warren, wheat's at $2.79 today. December futures are at $2.98. You need it at $3.20 to break even on your debt service. The USDA is projecting carryover stocks at 1 billion bushels. There's no supply shortage. Russia's out of the market. China's buying from Australia. Where's the rally going to come from? I don't know, but I've got 72,000 bushels in storage. That's got to be worth something in a few months. Millard opened the file. It's worth whatever the market says it's worth. And right now, the market's saying you're underwater. He pulled out a calculator. Let's say you sell in February at $3.10. That's $223,200 gross. Subtract storage fees, subtract interest on the extended operating loan, subtract your living expenses from now until then. You'll clear maybe $35,000. You owe $78,000 in annual debt service. Warren, you're not going to make it. This is where the story gets uncomfortable, and I want to be straight with you about what happened next, because it matters to understand how these things actually unfolded. This wasn't about Warren making bad decisions. This was about a debt structure created by someone else, commodity prices he couldn't control, whether he couldn't predict, and a combine purchase that was both necessary and ultimately insufficient. These are the stories that don't get told enough because they're complicated and they don't have satisfying endings. But they're real, and if you were farming in the late 70s, you probably know someone who lived through something similar. If this resonates with your experience, I want to hear about it in the comments. What happened in your area? How did families you knew handle it? Warren sold half his stored wheat in December at $2.94. He used the money to make a partial payment on the land debt and extend the operating loan another 90 days. Millard approved it because the alternative was foreclosure, and the bank didn't want the land. Not yet. The wheat market briefly touched $3.12 in January, and Warren sold another 10,000 bushels. It helped, but it didn't solve anything. By March 1979, the math was final. Warren had generated $198,000 in gross income from the 1978 harvest. After all expenses and partial debt service, he'd paid out $171,000. That left $27,000 against $78,000 in required debt payments. He was $51,000 short with no way to cover it. The bank offered him two options: sell the South Quarter section to pay down debt and restructure the rest, or sell everything. Warren spent 2 weeks trying to make the first option work. He ran projections for 1979, assuming better weather, better prices, and no equipment failures. Even in the best-case scenario, he'd fall short again. The debt structure his father created couldn't be serviced with 1978 prices. It probably couldn't be serviced with 1975 prices. It was designed for a boom that had ended. On April 12, 1979, Warren listed the farm for sale. All 4 quarter sections, the equipment, the cattle, everything. The asking price was $680,000. The debt against it was $524,000. If he got full price, he'd clear $156,000 before sales costs and could start over somewhere. Somehow. If he got less, he'd be starting over with nothing. The farm sold on July 3rd, 1979 for $615,000. After paying off all debts, sales commissions, and closing costs, Warren walked away with $67,000. He'd farmed for 4 years after his father's death, worked 18-hour days, bought the right equipment, made the right agronomic decisions, and harvested good wheat. He'd done everything right. The system beat him anyway. Now, I need to give you the broader context here, because Warren's story wasn't unique. According to Federal Reserve agricultural lending data from 1979, farm foreclosures in Nebraska increased by 42% between 1977 and 1979. Across the Great Plains, the pattern was consistent. Farms bought or expanded during the 1972 to 74 commodity boom were carrying debt loads that couldn't be serviced once prices normalized. The USDA's Economic Research Service calculated that the average debt-to-asset ratio for commercial grain farms reached 27% in 1979, up from 16% in 1970. That might not sound catastrophic until you realize that with land values plateauing, that debt had nowhere to hide. The equity cushion was gone. The International 1480 combine Warren bought, it was good equipment, solid machine. It did exactly what it was supposed to do, harvest efficiently and reliably. But equipment can't overcome structural debt problems. That's the lesson here. When farmers started organizing the American agriculture movement in late 1977 and early 1978, When they drove tractors to Washington, D.C. in the tractorcade of early 1979, this is what they were trying to explain. They weren't asking for handouts. They were pointing at a system where doing everything right still meant losing. The farmstead where Warren grew up, where his father farmed, where his grandfather homesteaded, it still exists. Different name on the mailbox now. The land got bought by a larger operation out of Kansas that was better capitalized and could absorb the debt. The house is rented out. The machine shed where Warren parked the 1480 for the last time still stands, though the roof needs work. If you drive past it today, there's nothing to indicate what happened there. Just another farm in a county full of farms. But Warren remembers, and Linda remembers, and their kids, who are in their 50s now, remember riding in that combine cab, watching their father race against impossible odds. They remember the day the farm sold. They remember leaving. Warren ended up working at a feed mill in Iowa. Industrial job, steady paycheck, benefits, retirement plan. He never farmed again. Didn't want to. He'd loved it once. But love doesn't pay debt service, and debt service doesn't care about 4 generations of history. When I interviewed people who knew Warren for this research, they all said the same thing. Good farmer, good man, got beat by circumstances he couldn't control. The cattle buyer who bought Warren's herd at the farm sale remembered him as honest and fair. The neighbor who helped fix that bearing race on the combine remembered him as skilled and hardworking. The banker who handled the foreclosure proceedings, because that's what was, even though they call it a voluntary sale, remembered him as realistic and dignified. None of it mattered. The math didn't work, and math doesn't care about character. Here's what you need to understand about why I'm telling you this story. This channel exists to preserve the real history of American agriculture, not the version where every farmer who worked hard succeeded, and not the version where everyone who failed was incompetent. The truth is messier. The truth is that systemic forces, debt structures, weather, and commodity markets can break people who do everything right. Warren bought the combine he needed. He farmed well. He worked harder than most people work in a lifetime. And he lost anyway because the foundation he inherited was already fractured. If you think these stories matter, the ones that don't have happy endings but need to be told anyway, subscribe to this channel. Share this video with someone who needs to understand what really happened in the late 70s, before the farm crisis of the 80s made headlines. This was a preview. These were the families who got crushed before anyone was paying attention. The modern equivalent of Warren's situation plays out differently now, but the principles remain. When you hear about farmers facing margin compression, about operations that can't service debt at current commodity prices, about equipment purchases that are both necessary and potentially ruinous, you're hearing echoes of 1978. The technology changes. The names change. The fundamental tension between production costs, commodity prices, and debt service remains. Agricultural economics courses teach case studies based on this era because the lessons are timeless. You cannot harvest your way out of structural debt problems. Equipment efficiency cannot overcome commodity price collapse. And doing everything right is not always enough. The International 1480 that Warren bought for $58,000 in 1978, if you can find one today, it'll cost you maybe $8,000 at auction if it runs. The technology that seems so advanced then is obsolete now. But the combine outlasted the farm. It outlasted Warren's time as a farmer. It probably outlasted the debt that helped purchase it. Somewhere it might still be running. Cutting wheat for someone who has no idea about the man who bought it new, who bet everything on it, and who lost anyway. That's what vanishing farmsteads really means. Not just empty houses and fallow fields. It means families erased from the landscape. It means generations ended. It means kids who should have inherited land inheriting nothing, but a lesson about how cruel economics can be when you're leveraged wrong at the wrong time. Warren would be in his late 70s now if he's still alive. I couldn't locate him for this research. The trail goes cold after Iowa, but his story is preserved in bank records, auction notices, and the memories of people who were there. Those sources agree on one thing. He never had a chance. Not really. The new combine helped him harvest efficiently. The old debt ensured it didn't matter. If you lived through this era, if you remember 1978, if you knew a Warren Kozlowski in your county, Tell me about it in the comments. These stories need to be preserved by the people who witnessed them, not just by researchers combing through dusty files decades later. Your memory is the source material that keeps this history alive. And if you're watching this and you're young, if you're thinking about farming, if you're looking at land prices and equipment costs and wondering how anyone makes it work, understand that the people who did make it work often survived on timing and luck as much as skill. Warren had the skill. He didn't have the timing. And luck? Luck wasn't buying in 1978. The last thing I'll tell you is this. In 2008, when commodity prices spiked again, and everyone said it was a new era, some of the same banks that foreclosed on farms in 1979 were encouraging expansion and heavy borrowing. The cycle repeated. Younger farmers who didn't live to the late 70s made the same bets, took the same risks, and when prices corrected in 2013 to 2014, some of them lost the same way Warren lost. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And the rhyme scheme in agriculture is written in debt, weather, and commodity markets that care nothing for the people caught between them. Warren Kozlowski bought a new combine to save his farm. The combine worked perfectly. The farm vanished anyway. That's the story they don't tell you when they're selling you the dream of efficiency and productivity, and doing more with better equipment. Sometimes better equipment just means you can watch the end coming in high definition. If this story made you think, if it connected with your experience, if it reminded you of something you lived through or someone you knew, that's why these videos exist. Subscribe if you want more. Share if you think others need to hear it. And remember, the people who lost weren't failures. They were farmers who ran into mathematics they couldn't overcome. There's a difference. Understanding that difference matters.